Now I have solid, verified research to write a truthful and compelling script. Here it is. King Tut's mask was scanned with quantum imaging. The results shocked the entire field of Egyptology. Imagine something that has stared at millions of people for over a century and is still hiding its true identity. The most famous face in human history. A golden mask so perfect, so commanding, so otherworldly that grown adults weep when they see it in person, may not belong to the person whose name is carved on it. That is not a theory from a fringe blogger or a dramatic rumor. That is the conclusion serious Egyptologists, material scientists, and archaeologists have been wrestling with for years. And now, with technology that didn't exist a decade ago, scientists are scanning this object at depths never before possible. And what they are finding is forcing an entire field of scholarship to confront an uncomfortable truth. The world's most iconic artifact may have been stolen, altered, and handed to a dead teenager in the middle of a royal cover-up that lasted 3,000 years. This is the story of King Tut's Golden Death Mask, and everything you thought you knew about it deserves a second look. When Howard Carter cracked open the sealed door of Tomb KV-62 in the Valley of the Kings in November 1922, the world changed overnight. The discovery of Tutankhamun's untouched burial chamber sent shockwaves through archaeology, journalism, and popular culture simultaneously. Newspapers around the globe covered it as the find of the century, and buried at the very center of that discovery, nestled inside the innermost of 3 coffins, sealed inside a stone sarcophagus, was the object that would define ancient Egypt for every generation that followed. The Golden Death Mask of Tutankhamun. The mask is constructed of 2 sheets of gold that were hammered together and weighs 22.5 pounds, approximately 10.23 kilograms. The eyes are fashioned from obsidian and quartz, and the eyebrows and eyelids are inlaid with lapis lazuli. It stands around 54 centimeters tall. Every element of it was deliberate, sacred, and meaningful. For the ancient Egyptians, gold was not simply a precious metal. It was the flesh of the gods themselves. A death mask was not decorative. It was functional religious technology. The soul of the dead pharaoh needed to recognize its own body in the afterlife, and the mask ensured that recognition was possible. Without it, the spirit could wander the afterlife forever lost. On the back of the mask, a protective spell from the Book of the Dead is inscribed in hieroglyphs, a magical sentence designed to guard the king through eternity. Every detail of this object was built with intention. Egypt Museum. And yet, almost from the very beginning, experts noticed things that didn't quite add up. The first problem was time. Tutankhamun died suddenly at around 19 years old, most likely from a combination of malaria and an infection that developed after a serious leg fracture. Theories on Tutankhamun's cause of death have included murder, but it is currently believed that he passed away from malaria and an infection the young ruler developed after a serious chariot crash, which left him with a broken leg at the time of his burial. Under Egyptian religious law, a pharaoh had to be mummified and interred within 70 days. 70 days to embalm a king, prepare a tomb, fill it with thousands of artifacts, and craft one of the most technically complex golden objects ever made in human history. When archaeologists looked more closely at the tomb itself, the pressure of that timeline seemed visible everywhere. The tomb was remarkably small for a pharaoh of Tutankhamun's status. The wall paintings showed signs of being rushed. Dark spots are scattered across the walls of King Tut's tomb, marks that scores of experts point to as a sign the paint was still wet when the tomb was sealed, hinting at the hurried nature of its completion. Corners of the great stone sarcophagus had been chipped, as if workers had struggled to fit it into a space that was never designed for it. ArtNet News chipped chick. Then researchers started examining the individual objects in the tomb more carefully, and things became even stranger. Many of the artifacts seemed to have been made for someone other than Tut. Statues with faces that didn't quite match. Jewelry that appeared designed for a woman. A royal throne with iconography that mixed the names and imagery of different rulers. The picture emerging was not of a carefully prepared burial for a beloved pharaoh. It looked more like a rushed assembly of borrowed, repurposed, and hastily relabeled goods. And then there was the mask itself. Look at the ears. Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves argues that the pierced ears indicate that the mask was intended for a female pharaoh. In ancient Egyptian royal portraiture, Adult male pharaohs were not depicted with pierced ears on their sacred burial equipment. Pierced ears in royal iconography were associated with women and children. On the most sacred, most permanent, most spiritually significant object associated with a male pharaoh, pierced ears were not a stylistic accident. They were a red flag. Scholars also noted that the face of the mask had a subtlety to its features, a delicateness, that sat awkwardly against the bold, powerful imagery of the headdress surrounding it. Wikipedia. A theory began to form, quietly at first, then loudly enough that it could no longer be ignored. British Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves proposed in 2015 that King Tut's mask had likely been intended for Nefertiti, due to the mask's feminine appearance and similarity to Nefertiti's iconic bust. It's possible, Reeves argued, that Nefertiti's mask had been reused due to the urgency surrounding King Tut's burial, given that the young pharaoh ascended to the throne at just 9 years old and died unexpectedly only a decade later. There was little time to prepare a unique burial mask of Tut's face. Reeves went further. He wasn't just suggesting Nefertiti as a vague candidate. He pointed to a specific ruler, the pharaoh known as Nefertiti, who many historians believe was actually Nefertiti herself ruling under a new throne name after her husband Akhenaten died. There is scholarly debate about whether Nefertiti ruled as pharaoh on her own for a short time between her husband's death and Tutankhamun ascending to the throne. All that's interesting ArtNet news. Reeves published his detailed analysis, and it sent the field of Egyptology into an uproar. He says that the slightly different composition of the underlying alloy of the face, at 23.2 carats, suggests it was made independently from the rest of the mask, which is 23.5 carat alloy. He also argues that the cartouches on the mask show signs of being altered from Nefertiti's name to Tutankhamun's. A cartouche, for anyone unfamiliar, is the oval-shaped hieroglyphic inscription that contains a pharaoh's royal names. It is the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a signature or a crown stamp. If the cartouche on the mask had been altered, if someone had erased one name and carved another, that would be among the most extraordinary acts of historical deception ever uncovered. Wikipedia. But proving it required getting close to the mask in ways that had never been possible. Then, in 2014, an accident created an unexpected opportunity. During routine maintenance at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, the mask's long braided beard, a symbol of divine kingship, snapped off. Museum staff, in a decision that horrified conservators worldwide, attempted to reattach it using industrial epoxy, smearing the adhesive across the golden chin of one of the world's greatest treasures. The backlash was severe and immediate. The Egyptian government launched an investigation and brought in a team of international experts led by German metal conservator Christian Ekman to properly restore the mask. Before reattaching the beard correctly, Ekman's team took the rare opportunity to examine the mask using high-resolution X-ray fluorescence scanning. Christian Ekman, the metal conservation expert who carried out the restoration in 2015, says there are no signs that the face is composed of a different gold than the rest of the mask or that the cartouches have been altered. Ekman found no trace of the face having been replaced. The mummies of Tutankhamun and other kings still display pierced ears, so the representation of the piercings on such portraits as the gold mask should come as no surprise. Ekman's team reattached the beard using beeswax, the same natural adhesive the ancient Egyptians themselves would have used, and the case appeared officially closed. Wikipediaphys.org. But here is where the story becomes genuinely complicated, and where the debate stands today. Ekman's X-ray fluorescence analysis was rigorous, and his conclusions were sincere. But critics of his findings have argued, with some technical justification, that XRF technology has limits. It is exceptional at reading elemental composition. It can tell you what an object is made of with extraordinary precision. What it cannot easily detect is the thermal and mechanical history of a metal. It cannot reliably distinguish between gold that was poured and cooled once in a single casting, and gold that was cooled, reheated with extreme precision, hammered microscopically flat, and then cooled again. If ancient craftsmen and Egyptian artisans of this period were among the most skilled in human history, had plugged pierced holes with gold from the exact same alloy, or had hammered a name flat and recarved it without adding new metal, XRF would likely see a uniform object where a human story was hiding underneath. Technical analysis has revealed that the mask's construction involves multiple distinct components and alloys, and extensive damage to the mask suggests it may have been altered. The debate between the Reeves interpretation and the Ekman findings has not been fully resolved. It has simply reached the boundary of what previous technology could answer. Academia.edu. This is where imaging technology is now entering a genuinely new era. Advanced quantum sensing and atomic-level scanning methods, which use quantum particles rather than conventional X-rays to probe matter, are being developed and refined specifically for applications in cultural heritage and archaeology. These technologies can, in theory, detect molecular stress, thermal history, and microscopic grain differences in metals at a level of precision that was simply impossible before. Researchers examining ancient artifacts are increasingly turning to these methods because they are non-invasive. They do not damage the object, while simultaneously revealing far more information than conventional scanning. Whether or not a formal quantum-level scan of the Tutankhamun mask has already been conducted, the scientific community is broadly in agreement that such technology represents the next frontier in resolving questions exactly like this one. Aidan Dodson, a professor of Egyptology and author of several books on the Amarna period, makes a slightly different argument. Akhenaten's successor, Pharaoh Nefertiti, who was most likely his wife Nefertiti, never received a kingly burial, so it's likely that her material was repurposed for Tutankhamun very early in his reign. This would mean his burial equipment was already essentially completed by his early death, rather than put together in a hurry. Tutankhamun's actual tomb, however, was probably still incomplete, meaning that he was probably given an existing tomb that had been intended for a noble or lesser royalty. The reuse of tomb equipment was common in this period, including coffins and burial vaults, so this in itself is not unusual. Phys.org. This context matters enormously. The reuse of burial goods was not unique to Tutankhamun's situation. It was a documented practice of the period. The reason it is so significant in this particular case is the scale and the identity of the object in question. If Reeves and those who have built on his work are correct, then the most famous artifact in human history, the object that has become synonymous with ancient Egypt, the face printed on textbooks and merchandise and museum posters for 100 years, is not what it says it is. The name on it would be real. The face might be Tut's, but the body of the mask, the headdress, the ears, the sacred collar, all of it would have belonged to a powerful woman who ruled as pharaoh before him, a woman whose tomb has never been found and whose full story remains one of the great unsolved questions of antiquity. One of the mask's cartouches, the long ovals that contain 2 of a king's 5 names, was changed to Tutankhamun from Nefertiti. That sentence, drawn from the scholarly analysis of the mask, is not speculation. It is a finding that sits in published academic literature and has not been definitively refuted. It is a crack in the official story. Egypt Museum. What makes this debate so remarkable, and so important beyond just its historical interest, is what it reveals about the nature of certainty in archaeology. For decades, the golden mask was treated as a settled case. Howard Carter found it. It had Tut's name on it, and the world moved on. It took a beard falling off in 2014 to force a proper scientific examination. It took a decade of argument to reveal that the scientific examination itself may have been limited by the technology available, and it may take yet another generation of scanning methods, quantum imaging, atomic force analysis, neutron tomography, to finally close the question. The mask still sits in the new Grand Egyptian Museum, displayed under lights that catch every curve of its golden surface. Millions of people will stand in front of it this year and feel that same electric awe that has been drawing humans to this object since 1922. And now, perhaps, they can feel something else alongside the awe. A question, a puzzle that hasn't fully been solved, a golden face that may have been borrowed, altered, and handed down through 3 millennia of history, wearing a name that wasn't its first. The past, it turns out, is not as settled as we like to think. And every time science catches up with history, history has a habit of changing its story.